Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron.
What the listener may or may not know is that every tip I write for the newsletter goes through the careful scrutiny of Aaron's watchful eye. So just like with code, where we have a pull request review process and there's some back and forth, same thing for every tip article. And
And a lot of that is, I mean, there's code in there, so that makes
Sure.
sense there. But
Yeah.
also, we can develop our thought process together. So in general, we agree on most things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I find it very helpful because sometimes you will say, like, point out a word that I've used that maybe could be considered not desirable. Not to give specifics. I'll leave it to your imagination. But or just like a
Boy,
different
all the F bombs that Joel uses, I have to constantly like get them out of there. Oof.
I am just the worst that way. But you just bring a different perspective, and I find that useful. But as we were prepping for today's podcast, I learned that you actually disagreed with one of my recent tips, and I am shocked that it got approved, and I want to talk about that.
Yeah, it's not so much that I disagree with the whole tip
Okay.
or that the tip was wrong. And so, and that's just subjective too, right? I'm not
Yeah.
saying that I know everything either. I mean, that's why we're all here. We're all trying to learn more, right?
Sure.
I think you can read and understand someone's point of view and not agree with it and still see that it's a valid point of view, or
Yeah.
that it's like most of it seems valid. And there's no reason to pick on that, right? Especially like, these times in our world, everyone wants to like drag down and fight. I'm just like, no, I agree with 80% of what Joel's saying, and most of that's right. I don't see any technical problems. So it's good to go. And so I'll give a little context. The one I'm referring to was you most recently, a couple days ago, maybe, I don't, who knows what time, wrote a tip about feature flakes.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, you kind of went into like how they can be used and all these different things. One of the title was feature flags are meant to be temporary.
Yes.
And that's the part that I disagreed with.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll set it up for. I guess there's probably somebody out there that hasn't read the tip, but the general idea I was putting forward is that, in my view, feature flags are temporary. They serve a purpose as you're rolling out something new. At some point, it becomes stable, and then you want to clean up the feature flag. And so that was really the thrust of the tip, was how to build your feature flags in a way that you're not like spreading them throughout your entire code base, and they can be cleaned up easier if you want to remove them in the future. And so what part of that, the temporary bit, I guess,
Yeah.
doesn't harmonize with
So,
your experience.
Right. I agreed with that in all cases of it. In the cases that the feature flag is temporary, everything you said, I agree with.
Okay.
So, but my experience comes from a little bit of different languages as well, like yours. And one of the languages I worked with was RPG4 on the AS400 or System I. And those developers had a different system than we do. And so it's this idea of cascading libraries and data in specific locations and stuff. So almost like a PHP include path, where everything's going to kind of fall back and you can find stuff. And so one of the things that we were responsible for was writing code for 5 different companies. And most of those companies had all the same requirements. Some of the companies had slightly different requirements. And so we're talking about,
As they always do.
Yeah. And we're talking about like a old system. So like it started with RPG3 and then moved to 4. So RPG3 even was like where you have code on the screen in the column matters. Like specific column places meant specific things. So we're talking about an older system that is made for processing data and it's really fast. And it was more efficient in that way to set up those systems with feature flags for the specific almost environment. So we might refer to them as like environmental configuration in Laravel or something like that.
Okay.
They were using it as their feature flag system. So that's what I mean is like, I don't think they're all temporary, is that code was meant to always exist. And it's like, for 4 out of 5 companies, we call this, yellow. For the fifth, we're going to call it maze. And that was a feature flag based off of what set of criteria or context was using this code. So you might almost think about it like they were doing it in a very simplistic form of a strategy pattern that was maybe swapped in and out, except that it didn't have those polymorphic calls and all that different stuff that we can do in more object-oriented languages.
I'm just over here thinking, I thought you were younger than me, but you're talking about RPG and System I. What is going, like, what percentage of people listening to this right now even know what that is, Aaron?
Sorry.
But okay, so I'm absorbing what you said, and maybe my definition for feature flag is too narrow then. Like I was literally thinking about it in terms of rolling out a new feature, but you're saying in some contexts like this RPG world, feature flags were used also for just control flow, like configuration.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. What about just to push back a little bit? Like, what about in the Laravel context? Because that's who the audience is for the newsletter. It is called Mastering Laravel, after all. Do you think have you seen that same sort of use of feature flags, or are you just extrapolating that somebody out there probably still is doing it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen this firsthand yet in Laravel, but the Laravel pennant and other feature flag systems are relatively new. Relatively, I mean, within the last couple of years.
Sure.
And so I've seen them a lot as those temporary sort of feature flags. The other thing I've seen is the ability to do an A/B testing sort of thing.
Right. Okay.
But not for getting a result. Really just to split, not to split traffic, but to split functionality. And I guess it was for a result, but it wasn't like this is temporary. This was just we want to run. I guess it was temporary, but it's like long-term temporary. We want to run 20% of our users through a different flow for the next year to see if that changes their experience. So I guess that's temporary, but it just feels like a longer term than the kind of concept you were referring to.
Yeah, and it is a different concept than rolling out a new feature. It's like, no, there's just going to be 2 paths or 3 paths or whatever. And maybe even like, I don't know, I'm just trying to go with your line of thinking here. Like even some customizations that are sort of market or geography based, like you could use feature flags to implement some of that logic too. So maybe the feature flag, the technical thing of how you determine if a feature is on or off, is sort of separate than the use case. Whereas I was kind of focused on one use case of rolling out a new feature in a controlled way. There's all these other use cases for that technical mechanism.
Yeah, and I think one of the kind of to wrap this up, one of the points you had was let's not put all these feature flag like checks everywhere.
Right.
And that's still valid, whether or not it's a temporary one or like a full-time one. Let's try to, put those in a very centralized place. And also, feature flag identifiers being enums, things like that, so you can keep track of them. Regardless of the way that you want to use that, those are all great tips. And anyone who hasn't read that tip should definitely go to it and read it. We got a really personal question for you, Joel.
I love those.
As a child, did you eat paste?
Oh boy, I definitely have a memory of somebody in my class being a notorious glue eater. Like paste, glue, same thing.
I think the paste was like the thicker stuff that like maybe you had like a container and maybe there was a stick in it or something, and glue, like Elmer's glue would like come out. And I'm talking about like the paste. So like it had its own unique smell.
I definitely, I'm sure I've tasted it as a kid, but I wouldn't say I regularly partook.
I was just thinking about that the other day, like all those things. Like I don't think I ever really thought about eating paste until someone said, "Don't eat paste." Like as a kid, I was in kindergarten, I didn't really want to put any glue in my mouth. I understood what it meant, but someone said, "Don't eat paste," and I was like, "Well, we got to start smelling this at least."
That's right. It's like when someone says, "Don't think about X," like that's the immediate thing you think about. So it's
no, I think about Twitter. So, little secret here at the very end, I was trying to say the name of our website and I forgot it.
Well, I know what it is, Aaron. It's masteringlaravel.io. And if you'd like to sign up to get those tips delivered to your inbox, you can do that right from the homepage.